He claimed she was a flight risk. He claimed the mother was carrying forged papers. But the school's security footage would eventually reveal a different reality. A veteran immigration attorney tackled by Agent Derek Harlan, an officer prioritizing profiling over protocol. Harlan thought his badge gave him the power to brutalize a woman he assumed had no voice. He didn't know that the woman he handcuffed in front of her twins wasn't just a civilian. She was the wife of General Michael Bennett, the Pentagon official overseeing domestic defense operations. Agent Harlan thought he was filling a quota. He had no idea that before his shift ended, he wouldn't just be facing a lawsuit. He would be surrendering his weapon to a squad of U.S. Marshals. This is the story of the traffic stop that brought the full weight of the Pentagon down on a rogue agent. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Academy, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the circular driveway. Rachel Bennett checked the time, right on schedule. She had a deposition with the Ramirez family and a lifetime of discipline that made her incapable of being late. "Mom, can we get pizza after school?" her son Jacob asked from the back seat, his uniform tie already slightly askew. "We'll see, baby. Depends on how long Mommy's meeting runs." Rachel caught his eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. Her daughter Sophia was already unbuckling, eager to join her friends clustering near the entrance. This was the routine. This was the life Rachel had built with her own two hands. A law degree from Georgetown, years defending families just like the one she came from, a partnership at Ellison and Reed, and a home in a neighborhood where her children could walk to the park without her heart climbing into her throat. She had earned every inch of this driveway, every moment of this peace. The Range Rover's engine purred as she eased forward in the drop-off line. Other parents waved. Mrs. Rodriguez from the PTA, Mr. Morales, whose asylum case she'd won years ago. This was her community, her sanctuary. "Love you both. Make good choices." She kissed Sophia's forehead, then Jacob's, watching them merge into the stream of children flowing toward the red brick building. Sophia's backpack bounced against her shoulders. Jacob turned once to wave, his gap-toothed grin making her chest tight, with the kind of love that felt like prayer. Rachel put the car in drive, checking her mirrors with the precision of someone who had passed the bar exam on the first try. Her phone buzzed with a text from her paralegal. "The Ramirez family is here early, very nervous." She typed back quickly, "On my way. Brew the good coffee." She was reaching for her travel mug when the unmarked sedan swerved into her lane. The screech of tires made her foot slam the brake. Her coffee splashed across the center console. The black sedan, government plates, tinted windows, had cut her off so aggressively that her bumper stopped inches from its rear panel. Rachel's heart hammered, adrenaline flooding her system with the kind of clarity that came from years of courtroom combat. The driver's door opened. A white man in his late 30s stepped out, tactical vest stretched across a gym-built frame, aviator sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. His hand rested on his holster with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. Rachel's legal mind cataloged details automatically. No marked vehicle, no lights or sirens, no probable cause for a traffic stop in a school zone. Her hands moved to 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, visible, non-threatening. She had given this lecture to clients many times. Stay calm. Don't give them a reason. The man approached her window with the swagger of authority, his badge swinging from a chain around his neck. Rachel's stomach dropped. She knew that walk. She had seen it in courtrooms, in detention centers, in the nightmares of families she represented. He rapped his knuckles against her window. Hard, aggressive. Rachel lowered it halfway, her voice steady despite the tremor trying to climb up her throat. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." His voice was flat, bored like he'd said these words 1,000 times to 1,000 faces that all looked the same to him. "I'm sorry, but I haven't committed any traffic violation. I'm in a school drop-off zone and I need to step out of the vehicle." His hand moved closer to his weapon. Now. Behind them, other parents were slowing down, craning their necks. Rachel could see Mrs. Rodriguez's face in her peripheral vision, confusion morphing into concern. This was happening in front of her children's school, in front of the life she had built, in front of witnesses who would remember that Rachel Bennett, attorney, mother, citizen, was being treated like a criminal in a place where she belonged. "Officer, I'm an attorney. I know my rights. And unless you have reasonable suspicion of a crime, I'm not required to—" "Reasonable suspicion." He leaned closer and Rachel could smell coffee and contempt on his breath. "You're in a vehicle matching a description. You're going to show me some ID and you're going to do it now, or we're going to have a problem." Rachel's hands didn't shake as she reached for her purse. They couldn't. Not here. Not in front of the red brick building where her children were supposed to be safe. Agent Derek Harlan watched her move, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. He had already decided who she was, what she was. He had no idea what he'd just started. Rachel's fingers moved slowly, deliberately toward the passenger seat where her leather briefcase sat. "My identification is in my bag. I'm reaching for it now. Keep your hands where I can see them." Harlan's voice sharpened, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "That's what I'm trying to do, officer. I'm narrating my movements so there's no misunderstanding." Rachel kept her tone even, professional, the same voice she used with hostile witnesses. She retrieved her wallet, extracting her driver's license and her bar association card. "Here's my license. I'm also an attorney with Ellison and Reed. I specialize in immigration law, so I'm very familiar with—" "I didn't ask for your resume." Harlan snatched the cards from her hand, barely glancing at them. "This says Rachel Bennett. You got anything else? Passport? Naturalization papers?" The question landed like a slap. Rachel felt heat crawl up her neck, but she forced it down, buried it beneath years of professional composure. "I'm a U.S. citizen. That's a valid state-issued ID. Under the Fourth Amendment, I'm not required to provide additional documentation without probable cause." Probable cause? Harlan's laugh was sharp, humiliating. He handed her license back, but kept the bar card, turning it over in his hands like he was examining a forgery. "You people always think you know the law better than the people enforcing it. You people." The words hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. "Officer, I don't want any trouble. I have a deposition coming up. My children just went into that building. If you could please explain what law I violated. Oh, I'm happy to cooperate within the bounds of—" "Step out of the vehicle." Harlan's hand was fully on his weapon now. Final warning. Rachel's mind raced through her options. She could comply. Let this man humiliate her in front of her community. Be late to the Ramirez family who was counting on her. Or she could assert her rights. The same rights she told her clients they possessed. The same rights that were supposed to protect people who looked like her from exactly this kind of harassment. "Am I being detained or arrested?" Her voice remained steady, but her heart was a war drum against her ribs. "You're being non-compliant is what you're being. That's not a legal standard, officer. If I'm free to go, I need to leave. If I'm being detained, you need to articulate reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. If I'm under arrest, you need probable cause. Which is it?" Harlan's jaw clenched. A vein pulsed at his temple. Rachel watched him realize that she wasn't gonna cry, wasn't gonna cower, wasn't going to perform the fear he expected. She had spent too many years in courtrooms facing down federal prosecutors to be intimidated by a man who didn't even know the basics of constitutional law. "You want to play lawyer?" Harlan leaned in close enough that Rachel could see her reflection in his sunglasses. "Fine. I've got reports of undocumented individuals using this area for drop-offs. You match a description. That's my reasonable suspicion. Now get out of the car before I drag you out." "What description?" Rachel's voice cut like a blade. "Be specific, officer. What description do I match?" The silence stretched between them. Behind Harlan, Rachel could see more parents stopping, phones coming out. Mrs. Rodriguez had her window down watching. Mr. Morales had stepped out of his car entirely. Good. Let them see. Let them record. "You're obstructing a federal investigation." Harlan stepped back, his hand moving to his radio. "I'm calling for backup." "For what?" "A woman sitting in her car in a school zone with valid identification." Rachel's composure was cracking now, not from fear, but from fury. "I know what this is. I've represented dozens of people who've been profiled exactly like this. You saw a black woman in a nice car and assumed she didn't belong here. You assumed I was undocumented because of the color of my skin. That's not reasonable suspicion, officer. That's racial profiling, and it's illegal." Harlan's face flushed red. "You think you're smart? What do you think that fancy degree means you can talk to me like? Like what? Like a citizen? Like someone who knows her rights?" Rachel's voice rose despite herself. "I'm not getting out of this car without a lawful order, and you haven't provided one. Last chance." Harlan's voice dropped to something dangerous, something that made Rachel's survival instincts scream, "No." The word hung in the air for one crystalline moment. Rachel saw Harlan's expression shift from anger to something worse. Wounded pride, masculine rage. The fury of a man whose authority had been questioned by someone he considered beneath him. His hand moved to her door handle. "Officer, don't." The door flew open. Harlan's hand shot in, grabbing for her arm. And Rachel Bennett, attorney at law, wife of General Michael Bennett, mother of two, realized with terrible clarity that the law she had spent her life defending was about to fail her completely. Harlan's hand clamped around Rachel's wrist like a vice, yanking her toward the open door. Her seatbelt caught, jerking her back, and the sudden resistance made him pull harder. "Don't touch me!" Rachel's voice cracked with shock and fury. "You have no right." "You're resisting," Harlan shouted, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear, loud enough to justify what came next. Rachel tried to brace herself against the doorframe, her legal mind still searching for the words that would stop this, the precedent that would protect her. But there were no words. There was only Harlan's grip tightening, his other hand reaching across her body to unbuckle the seatbelt, his face twisted with the kind of rage that came from being told no by someone he thought had no right to refuse him. The seatbelt released. Rachel felt herself being dragged from the vehicle, her feet scrambling for purchase on the pavement. Her briefcase tumbled out behind her, spilling files across the ground. The Ramirez family's asylum application scattered in the morning breeze. "Stop. You're hurting me." The words ripped from her throat, raw and desperate. This wasn't the courtroom. This wasn't a deposition where facts and logic mattered. This was something primal, something she had spent her entire professional life trying to protect others from experiencing. Should have thought about that before you decided to be difficult. Harlan spun her around, slamming her against the side of the Range Rover. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Her cheek pressed against the cold metal, her arms wrenched behind her back. "I'm calling the police!" Mrs. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. "Someone call 911. "I am the police," Harlan roared back, not even looking at the crowd. His knee drove into the back of Rachel's legs, forcing her down. "She's resisting arrest." "I'm not resisting," Rachel gasped, her face scraping against the car as she struggled to breathe. "I'm a citizen. I'm an attorney. My name is Rachel Bennett." But Harlan wasn't listening. He never had been. His hand pressed against the back of her head, holding her in place, while his other hand fumbled for his handcuffs. Rachel felt the metal bite into her wrist, too tight, cutting off circulation. She had seen these marks before on clients, on victims, on people who came to her office with stories just like this one. "Please," she heard herself say, and hated the sound of it. Hated that she was begging, and hated that years of education and expertise meant nothing against the weight of a badge and the color of her skin. "Please, my children are in that building. Should have thought about your kids before you broke the law." "What law?" Rachel twisted her head, trying to see his face. "Tell me what law I broke." Harlan's response was to wrench her other arm back, the second cuff clicking into place with brutal efficiency. The pain shot through her shoulders, her arms forced into an unnatural position that made her cry out. She had never been handcuffed before, had never understood the particular humiliation of it, the way it reduced you to an object, a problem to be processed. "You're making a mistake," Rachel said, her voice shaking now, composure finally shattering. "My husband, I don't care if you're married to the president." Harlan hauled her upright, his grip on her arms making her gasp. "You're going to processing, and then we'll see how smart you are." The crowd had grown. Parents stood frozen, children pressed against their legs. Phones were raised recording everything. Rachel saw Mr. Morales on his phone speaking rapidly. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying, her hand over her mouth. And there in the window of St. Michael's Academy, Rachel saw faces, small faces, children watching their friend's mother being brutalized by a man in a badge. "God, please don't let Sophia and Jacob see this." Harlan marched her toward his sedan, his hand gripping the chain between her cuffs, using it like a leash. Rachel stumbled, her heels catching on the pavement. She had dressed for court this morning. She had put on her power suit and her pearls and her armor of professionalism. Now she was being paraded like a criminal in front of the community she had worked so hard to join. "This is illegal detention," she shouted, finding her voice again, finding the attorney beneath the terrified woman. "I'm invoking my right to remain silent. I want a lawyer." "You are a lawyer," Harlan said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Lot of good it's doing you." He opened the back door of his sedan. Not a proper transport vehicle, Rachel noted, with the part of her brain still cataloging evidence. No partition, no cameras, just an unmarked car with government plates, and a man who thought his badge made him untouchable. Harlan shoved her inside. Rachel's head cracked against the doorframe, stars exploding across her vision. She tasted copper blood from her split lip. "Wait," she gasped. "Wait, I get a phone call. I have the right." The door slammed shut, cutting off her words. Through the tinted window, Rachel watched the crowd of parents, watched Mrs. Rodriguez still crying, watched Mr. Morales gesturing frantically into his phone. And she thought of Michael, her husband, her partner, the man who had promised to protect her from a world that saw her as less than. She needed him to keep that promise now, and the sedan reeked of stale fast food and fear. Rachel could smell it. The accumulated terror of everyone who had sat in this cage before her. How many others had Harlan thrown into this back seat? How many had been too afraid to fight back, too undocumented to risk asserting rights they technically possessed, but could never safely claim? Her wrists screamed where the cuffs bit into flesh. Harlan had tightened them deliberately. She knew the punishment for her defiance, for her education, for her refusal to perform the submission he expected. Rachel tried to shift her position, but every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her shoulders. Her arms were wrenched behind her at an angle that made her fingers tingle with numbness. Breathe. Just breathe. But breathing hurt. Her ribs ached where Harlan had slammed her against the car, and her cheek throbbed. She could feel her lips swelling, taste blood on her tongue. The professional woman who had kissed her children goodbye felt like a different person, a different life, a reality that had been violently stripped away. Through the window, she watched Harlan talking to another officer who had arrived as backup. They were laughing, actually laughing. Harlan gestured toward the sedan, toward her, and the other officer nodded, clapping him on the shoulder like he had just made a good arrest instead of assaulting a citizen in a school zone. Rachel's legal mind kicked into gear, a survival mechanism, the only thing she had left. She began cataloging violations: unlawful stop, no probable cause, excessive force, false arrest, assault, battery, violation of civil rights under Section 1983. She could bury Harlan in litigation. She could take his badge, his pension, his freedom. But first, she had to survive this. The reality hit her like ice water. She wasn't in a courtroom where rules mattered. She was in the back of an marked car with a man who had already demonstrated his willingness to use violence. Harlan could drive her anywhere, could claim she tried to escape. No. Stop. Don't go there. Rachel forced herself to think strategically. She had one advantage Harlan didn't know about, one card she hadn't played yet, but she needed a phone, needed to make the call before Harlan processed her into whatever black hole of bureaucracy he was planning. The driver's door opened. Harlan slid behind the wheel, adjusting his rearview mirror to look at her. Their eyes met, and Rachel saw satisfaction there. Pride. The look of a man who thought he'd won. Comfortable back there? Counselor? His voice dripped with mockery. I need medical attention. Rachel kept her voice level. Professional. You've injured me. That's going to be documented. You injured yourself resisting. There are witnesses. There's video. There's a dangerous individual who refused to comply with a lawful order. Harlan started the engine. That's what my report will say. That's what matters. Your report is going to be evidence in your criminal trial. Rachel leaned forward as much as the cuffs allowed. Agent Harlan, I'm giving you one chance to end this. Uncuff me. Let me go. Apologize to those witnesses. And maybe I'll consider not destroying your entire life. Harlan's laugh was sharp and cruel. You threatening me? You're in my custody. You're going to processing. You're going to be photographed and fingerprinted and held until we verify your status. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. I get a phone call. Rachel's voice hardened. That's not negotiable. That's federal law. I get one phone call. You'll get your call when I say you get your call. No, I get it now before we leave this location, before you transport me anywhere. Rachel's heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. You've already violated my rights. Don't add unlawful detention to the list. Harlan met her eyes in the mirror again. Something flickered there. Uncertainty. Maybe a crack in his confidence. He had expected her to break by now, expected tears and pleading and the kind of submission that would validate his actions. Fine. He pulled out his phone, swiping through it with deliberate slowness. "One call. I'll make it quick. And if you try anything cute, I'll add obstruction to your charges." He held the phone up to her ear, his hand gripping it tight. Rachel's mind raced. She could call her office, could call a lawyer, could call the ACLU, or the local news, or any number of people who would document this nightmare. But documentation wouldn't get her out of this car, wouldn't stop Harlan from driving her to a facility where she could disappear into the system for hours or days, where her children would come home to an empty house and no explanation. She needed immediate intervention, needed someone with the power to mobilize resources faster than Harlan could process paperwork. She needed Michael. "Call my husband," Rachel said quietly. "General Michael Bennett, Pentagon extension 7742. Harlan's hand froze. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Rachel held his gaze in the mirror. "Make the call, Agent Harlan, while you still can." The Situation Room in the Pentagon wing was designed for crisis. Reinforced walls, encrypted communications. A table large enough to seat the people who made decisions that moved armies. General Michael Bennett sat at that table now, reviewing deployment schedules for the Southern Border Security Initiative, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his uniform pressed to razor-sharp precision. "The logistics are sound," he said, tapping the briefing document. "But I want redundancy on the supply chains. We can't have another situation like the one in Arizona." The door opened. Lieutenant Carter, his aide, stepped inside with the kind of hesitation that made every head in the room turn. You didn't interrupt a briefing with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, unless the building was on fire. "General Bennett." Carter's voice was tight, controlled. "Sir, you have an emergency call on your personal line." Michael felt his stomach drop. Personal line? Not official channels, not the red phone or the secure network. Personal meant family. Personal meant Rachel or the twins or something that couldn't wait for protocol. "Excuse me." He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. The deputy secretary nodded, concern flickering across his face. Michael followed Carter into the hallway, his mind already racing through possibilities. Car accident, school emergency, his mother's heart condition acting up again. Carter handed him the phone, his expression carefully neutral. "It's not Mrs. Bennett, sir. It's someone calling from her phone." Michael's blood turned to ice. "What?" He pressed the phone to his ear. "This is General Bennett, General." The voice on the other end was male, unfamiliar, but with the flat effect of someone reading from a script. "This is Agent Derek Harlan with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I have your wife in custody. She's been detained for—" "Stop talking." Michael's voice dropped to something cold and lethal, the tone he used when ordering men into combat. "Where is my wife? Is she hurt?" "Sir, she's fine. She was non-compliant during a routine. I asked if she's hurt." Each word was a bullet. "Answer the question, Agent Harlan." A pause. Michael could hear breathing on the other end. Could hear the moment Harlan realized this wasn't going according to his plan. "She has some minor injuries from resisting. Put her on the phone now." Another pause. Then Rachel's voice, strained and tight, but unmistakably hers. "Michael." The sound of her saying his name, scared, hurt, trying to stay strong, nearly broke him. Michael closed his eyes, his free hand clenching into a fist. Years of marriage, years of watching this brilliant, fierce woman fight for other people's families. And now someone had put their hands on her. "Baby, are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm handcuffed in the back of an unmarked car." Rachel's voice cracked. He stopped me at the school in front of the twins. Michael, he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't. The phone was yanked away. Harlan's voice returned harder now. Defensive. General, your wife refused to comply with a lawful order. She was belligerent. And what's your badge number? Michael's voice was surgical, precise. He was already moving down the hallway. Carter scrambling to keep up. Give me your badge number and your current location. Sir, I don't think you understand the situation. No, Agent Harlan, you don't understand the situation. Michael pushed through the door to his office, already reaching for his secure line. You just assaulted a United States citizen. You put your hands on my wife. You traumatized my children, and you did it without probable cause, without a warrant, and apparently without a functioning brain cell. General, I was doing my job. Your job? Michael's composure finally cracked, fury bleeding through every syllable. Your job is to enforce immigration law, not to brutalize black women in school zones because you've decided they don't belong there. Where are you? What facility are you taking her to? I'm not required to disclose. You're not required. Michael's laugh was sharp. Agent Harlan, let me explain something to you. I oversee domestic defense operations. That means I coordinate with every federal law enforcement agency in this country, including yours. That means I have the direct line to your director, your regional supervisor, and every person in your chain of command. And that means that in approximately 5 minutes, your career is going to be over. Silence on the other end. Michael could hear Rachel's voice in the background, muffled but insistent. But that's not the worst part. Michael continued, his voice dropping to something deadly calm. The worst part is that you hurt my wife. You put your hands on the mother of my children, and I'm not coming for you as a general, Agent Harlan. I'm coming for you as a husband. He hung up before Harlan could respond. His hands were shaking with rage, with fear, but with the terrible knowledge that Rachel had been hurt. And he hadn't been there to stop it. Carter stood in the doorway, phone already in hand. Sir, what do you need? Michael looked up and the expression on his face made his aide take a step back. This wasn't the measured diplomatic general who sat in briefing rooms. This was something older. Something primal. Get me the U.S. Marshals, get me the DOJ, and get me a location on my wife's phone. Michael's voice was steel. We're bringing her home. Lieutenant Carter had served under General Bennett for years. He had seen the man coordinate drone strikes in hostile territory, had watched him brief the Joint Chiefs with ice in his veins, had witnessed him maintain perfect composure during a mortar attack in Kandahar. But he had never seen this. The general's hands moved with mechanical precision across his desk, pulling up contacts, activating protocols. But his eyes burned with something that had nothing to do with military discipline. Get me Marshal Sarah Mitchell at the DOJ direct line. Michael had his secure phone pressed to one ear while typing coordinates into his computer with his free hand. And activate the MP unit at Fort Myer. I want a tactical team ready to roll. Sir, the MPs, that's for military jurisdiction. This is a civilian. I know exactly what jurisdiction this is, Lieutenant. Michael's voice cut like a blade. My wife is being unlawfully detained by a federal agent. That makes it a federal crime. The marshals have authority to arrest federal officers. The MPs are there to ensure compliance. Now, make the call. Carter nodded and stepped into the outer office, his own phone already dialing. Through the glass partition, he could see the general pulling up tracking software. His jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. The secure line clicked. Marshal Mitchell. Sarah, it's Michael Bennett. I need immediate assistance. Federal agent has unlawfully detained my wife. I'm sending you the location data now." Michael slowed down. "What are you talking about?" "ICE agent stopped my wife at our children's school. No probable cause. He assaulted her and handcuffed her and is currently transporting her to an unknown location. I have witnesses. I have video. And I have about 60 seconds before I lose what's left of my patience." There was a pause. Marshal Mitchell had worked with Bennett on joint task forces. She knew him as measured, diplomatic, the kind of officer who followed every regulation to the letter. This version of him, clipped, furious, barely controlled, was something new. "Send me everything you have. I'll mobilize a team immediately. I'm already mobilizing my own team. I need your people to make the arrest legal. Michael, you can't just—" He hung up and punched another number. This one rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Director Robert Thompson, it's Michael Bennett. One of your agents just made the worst mistake of his career." The director of ICE's regional office had been in a budget meeting. He was now standing, his assistant watching with wide eyes as his face went from confusion to alarm. "General Bennett, what's going on?" "Agent Derek Harlan, badge number I'm still waiting to receive. He stopped my wife this morning, assaulted her, and detained her without cause. I want his location. I want his supervisor. And I want them both in front of me. General, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. There's been an assault, Robert, on a U.S. citizen, on an attorney, on my wife. The only misunderstanding is Harlan's belief that his badge gives him the right to brutalize people." Michael's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You have two choices. You can cooperate with the investigation I'm about to launch, or you can go down with him. Choose quickly." The line went silent except for the sound of rapid typing. "He's en route to the city processing center. General, I swear I didn't authorize." "I don't care what you authorized. I care that one of your agents is currently committing a federal crime. Get someone to that facility now and tell them not to process her. If she gets entered into your system, if she gets photographed or fingerprinted or put in a cell, I will personally ensure that your entire regional office gets audited back to its founding." Michael hung up and grabbed his jacket. Carter appeared in the doorway. "Sir, MPs are rolling. Marshal Mitchell is meeting you at the facility, and I have Mrs. Bennett's location confirmed. She's still mobile. I'm heading south on the interstate. Get my car now." They moved through the Pentagon corridors at a pace just short of running. Officers stepped aside, sensing the urgency, the fury radiating off the general like heat. By the time they reached the parking level, 3 black SUVs were already idling, engines running. Military police in tactical gear stood at attention beside 2 armored vehicles. Sergeant Major Reynolds saluted as Michael approached. "Sir, we're ready to move on your order. The city processing center. Federal agent has unlawfully detained a civilian. We're extracting her and placing the agent under arrest." Michael climbed into the lead SUV. "Rules of engagement. Minimum necessary force, but I want overwhelming presence. This ends now." The convoy pulled out of the Pentagon garage like a spear, lights flashing and sirens wailing. They merged onto the highway with the kind of authority that made civilian traffic part like water. Michael sat in the back seat, his phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with Marshal Mitchell. "We're 10 minutes out," she said. "My team will handle the arrest. Michael, you need to stay back. Let us do our job." "That's my wife in there, Sarah." "I know. Which is why you need to let us handle it by the book. You go in there as her husband, and Harlan's lawyers will use it to claim intimidation. You want him to walk on a technicality." Michael closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe, to think like a general instead of a terrified husband. Fine. Your people make the arrest, but I'm going in to get Rachel. Agreed. Through the windshield, Michael could see the city blurring past. Somewhere ahead, Rachel was still in that car, still handcuffed, still hurting. The driver's voice cut through his thoughts. We have visual on the facility. Michael leaned forward, his eyes locked on the gray concrete building rising in the distance. The processing center, the place where Harlan thought he was going to book Rachel like a criminal. Photograph her, strip away her dignity piece by piece. The place where Agent Derek Harlan's world was about to come crashing down. All units, Michael said into his radio. We're going in. The processing center smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. Rachel had been in facilities like this before, but always on the other side of the glass, always with her briefcase and her bar card and the armor of professional distance. Now she was being marched through the intake area in handcuffs, her split lip throbbing, her wrist screaming, her dignity stripped away with every step. Harlan's hand gripped her elbow, steering her past rows of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Other detainees looked up. Tired faces, scared faces, faces that recognized her terror because they wore it themselves. An older woman clutched a rosary. A young man stared at the floor. A mother held her daughter close, whispering reassurances that sounded like prayers. This was Rachel's world. These were her clients, but she had never understood, not really, what it felt like to be on this side of the system, to be reduced to a body in custody, a problem to be processed. Intake desk, Harlan announced to the officer behind the plexiglass. Got a live one here. Refused to comply, resisted arrest, probably using forged documents. The intake officer, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced up from her computer. Name, Rachel Bennett. Rachel's voice was hoarse but steady. I'm an attorney with Ellison and Reed. I was unlawfully detained at my children's school. I need to speak to a supervisor immediately. Harlan laughed. Actually, laughed. They all say that. I'm a citizen. I have rights. You made a mistake. He leaned against the desk, performing for the intake officer. This one's got a law degree, apparently. I think she's smarter than everyone else. I don't think I'm smarter than everyone else, Agent Harlan. I just know the law better than you do. Rachel met his eyes, refusing to look away. And I'm telling you one last time, you need to release me now. My husband, your husband. Harlan's smile widened. Right. The general? I'm shaking. He turned to the intake officer. She tried that on the phone. Claims she's married to some Pentagon big shot. Like I'm supposed to believe that. The intake officer's fingers paused on her keyboard. She made a call. Yeah. To some number she claimed was the Pentagon. Probably her cousin or her lawyer or whoever. Harlan pulled Rachel toward the fingerprinting station. Come on, counselor. Let's get you processed. Then we'll see how real your general is. Rachel's mind raced. Michael had heard her, or had heard Harlan. That meant he was already moving, already mobilizing. She just needed to buy time. Needed to keep Harlan here long enough for... I'm invoking my right to an attorney, Rachel said loudly, projecting her voice across the intake area. I'm also filing a formal complaint for excessive force, unlawful detention, and violation of my civil rights under Section 1983. Everyone in this room is a witness. Harlan grabbed her hand, pressing her fingers against the digital scanner. You can file whatever you want. Won't change the fact that you're getting processed. Agent Harlan. The intake officer's voice had changed, uncertainty creeping in. If she's really an attorney, we should probably... She's not an attorney. She's undocumented and using a fake identity. And I've seen it 100 times. Harlan moved Rachel to the camera station. Smile for your booking photo, Mrs. Bennett, or whatever your real name is. Rachel stared into the camera lens, her face bruised, her lips swollen, her eyes burning with fury and humiliation. This photo would exist forever, would be in a database, would be evidence of the moment she was treated like a criminal in her own country. The flash went off. There we go. Harlan was enjoying this now, his earlier anger replaced with smug satisfaction. Now we'll run your prints, verify your identity, and see what else comes up. Maybe some outstanding warrants. Maybe some immigration violations. Maybe... The alarm cut through his words like a siren. Sharp, insistent, the kind of sound that meant lockdown or emergency or something that required immediate attention. The intake officer's head snapped up, her hand moving to her radio. All units, we have multiple federal vehicles approaching the facility. Repeat, multiple federal vehicles with military escort requesting immediate access. Harlan's smile faltered. What? The radio crackled again. Director Thompson is on the line. He's asking for Agent Derek Harlan by name. Says it's urgent. Rachel felt something shift in her chest. Hope. Vindication. The terrible satisfaction of watching someone realize they'd made a catastrophic mistake. She turned to Harlan, her voice quiet and deadly calm. I tried to warn you. Harlan's face had gone pale. He grabbed the radio from the intake officer. This is Harlan. What's going on, Agent Harlan? This is Director Thompson. Do not, I repeat, do not process the individual in your custody or release her immediately and report to my office. Sir, I don't understand. I made a legitimate arrest. You assaulted the wife of a 3-star general, you idiot. Thompson's voice exploded through the radio, loud enough for everyone in the intake area to hear. The U.S. Marshals are at our front door. The military police are surrounding the building, and if you've laid one more finger on Mrs. Bennett, you're going to federal prison. The color drained from Harlan's face. He looked at Rachel, really, looked at her for the first time, and saw not the undocumented immigrant he'd imagined, but the woman she actually was, educated, connected, powerful in ways his badge could never protect him from. No, he whispered. No, that's not. The doors to the intake area burst open. U.S. Marshals in tactical gear flooded through, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. Hands up, everyone. Hands up. Harlan's hands shot into the air, the radio clattering to the floor. Rachel stood perfectly still, her cuffed hands behind her back, her heart hammering with relief and rage, and the terrible knowledge that this nightmare was finally ending. And then she saw him, Michael striding through the door in his uniform, his face carved from stone, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. Their gazes locked, and Rachel saw her husband's composure crack, saw the fury and fear and love that he'd been holding back. He had come for her just like he promised he always would. Marshal Sarah Mitchell moved through the intake area like a force of nature, her team fanning out with practiced precision. U.S. Marshals Service. Nobody move. Hands where we can see them. The other officers complied immediately, confusion and alarm written across their faces. This wasn't protocol. Federal agents didn't raid other federal facilities, but the marshals weren't asking permission. They were taking control, securing every exit, every person, every potential threat. Harlan stood frozen, his hands still raised, his mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. The intake officer had backed away from her desk, hands up, eyes wide. The detainees in the waiting area pressed themselves against the walls, terrified that whatever was happening might somehow include them. And then Michael entered. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like a change in air pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. 3 stars gleamed on his uniform. His jaw was set. His eyes swept the space with tactical precision until they locked onto Rachel. For one heartbeat, the general disappeared, and only the husband remained. Michael's expression cracked. Pain, relief, rage all flickering across his face as he took in his wife's appearance. The swollen lip, the bruise blooming on her cheek, the handcuffs biting into her wrists. Get those off her. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Now, 2 marshals moved immediately to Rachel's side. One of them produced a key, his hands gentle as he unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell away, and Rachel gasped, her arms finally able to move, blood rushing back into her hands with painful intensity. She wanted to run to Michael, to collapse into his arms, but her legs felt unsteady, and her pride demanded she stand on her own. Michael closed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hands cupped her face with infinite care, tilting her head to examine her injuries. His thumb brushed near her split lip, not touching, just hovering, and Rachel saw his jaw clench with barely contained fury. "I'm okay," she whispered. "Michael, I'm okay." "No, you're not." His voice was rough, strained. "But you will be. I promise you will be." He pulled her against his chest, one arm wrapping around her shoulders, the other cradling the back of her head. Rachel felt herself shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing, the terror she'd been holding back flooding through her. She pressed her face into his uniform and let herself break just for a moment, just long enough to remember that she was safe now. Behind them, Harlan found his voice. "General Bennett, I can explain." Michael turned, and the look on his face made Harlan take an involuntary step back. The general released Rachel carefully, making sure she was steady before he moved toward the agent. Each step was measured, controlled. But there was violence coiled beneath that control, barely leashed. Agent Harlan. Michael stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be threatening, far enough to maintain discipline. "Do you know what you've done?" "Sir, I was following protocol." She matched a description, and when she refused to comply, "What description?" Michael's voice cut like a scalpel. "Be specific. What description did my wife match?" Harlan's mouth opened and closed. His eyes darted to the other officers looking for support that wasn't coming. There were reports of suspicious activity in that area. Undocumented individuals using the school for... My wife is a naturalized citizen. She's an immigration attorney with one of the most prestigious firms in the city. She was dropping our children off at their school. Michael took another step forward. "So, I'll ask you again. What description did she match?" The silence was damning. Everyone in the room knew the answer. Everyone could see it in Harlan's face, in his inability to articulate anything beyond the implicit bias that had driven his actions. "She's black," Rachel said quietly, her voice steady now. "That's the description I matched. That's the only description that mattered to you." Harlan's face flushed red. "That's not... I don't..." "Agent Derek Harlan." Marshal Mitchell stepped forward, her voice formal, official. "You are under arrest for assault, battery, unlawful detention, and deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent." "What?" "No, you can't." Harlan backed away, his hands coming up defensively. "I'm a federal agent. I was doing my job. Your job doesn't include brutalizing citizens." Mitchell nodded to her team. 2 marshals moved in, pulling Harlan's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place. the same cuffs that had been on Rachel's wrists minutes before. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Harlan struggled, his voice rising to something close to panic. This is insane. I stopped someone who was acting suspicious. I used appropriate force when she resisted. You profiled a woman in a school zone. Michael's voice was ice. You assaulted her in front of witnesses. You ignored her identification. You dismissed her rights. And you did it because you assumed that someone who looks like her couldn't possibly belong in that neighborhood, couldn't possibly be educated, couldn't possibly be married to someone like me. The marshals were pulling Harlan toward the door now, but Michael wasn't finished. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something only Harlan could hear, though the room had gone so quiet that his words carried anyway. You hurt my wife. You traumatized my children. And you did it wearing a badge that's supposed to represent justice. Michael's eyes were cold, merciless. I'm going to make sure you never wear that badge again. I'm going to make sure every person you've ever profiled, every family you've ever terrorized gets their day in court. And I'm going to make sure that when people hear your name, they remember you as the agent who thought he was above the law. Harlan was shaken now, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Please, General, I have a family. So does my wife. Michael turned away, dismissing him. Get him out of my sight. The marshals dragged Harlan through the doors, his protests fading into the distance. The intake area remained silent, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. The reversal had been total, absolute. The man with the badge and the gun and the authority had been reduced to a criminal in handcuffs, while the woman he'd brutalized stood free with her husband's arm around her shoulders, her dignity restored. Rachel looked up at Michael, saw the tension still coiled in his jaw, the fury still burning in his eyes. Take me home, she whispered. Please, just take me home. Michael nodded, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Let's go get our kids. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and faces Rachel had come to know after the video went viral. Faces of families who had reached out. Faces of people who had their own stories about Agent Derek Harlan. Their own scars from encounters that had never made the news. Inside, the sentencing had taken less than an hour. Federal Judge Elizabeth Harper had been thorough, methodical, and utterly unforgiving. Assault, battery, deprivation of rights under color of law, falsifying federal documents. Each charge had been read aloud, each one a nail in the coffin of Harlan's career. A term in federal prison, loss of pension, permanent ban from law enforcement. Rachel had sat in the gallery, Michael beside her, and watched Harlan's face as the sentence was delivered. She had expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, the sweet taste of justice served. Instead, she felt tired and determined, because Harlan's sentencing didn't undo what he'd done, didn't erase the nightmares Sophia still had, didn't stop Jacob from flinching when he saw police officers, didn't heal the dozens of other families Harlan had terrorized over his career. But it was a start. Now Rachel stood on the courthouse steps, the autumn sun warm on her face, a microphone thrust toward her by a reporter from CNN. Behind her, the building that had just delivered justice. Before her, the cameras that would carry her words to millions. Mrs. Bennett, how do you feel about today's sentencing? Rachel took a breath, gathering her thoughts. She had practiced this moment, rehearsed the words she wanted to say, but now, standing here with the weight pressing down on her shoulders, she found different words rising to her lips. Agent Harlan's sentencing is important, she began, her voice steady and clear. It sends a message that federal officers are not above the law, that badges don't grant immunity to brutalized citizens, that racial profiling has consequences. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw faces nodding, phones recording, people listening. But punishment isn't the same as justice. Justice isn't just about what happens to the person who caused harm. It's about what happens to the people who were harmed. It's about repair, restoration, making sure that what happened to me doesn't keep happening to others. Another reporter called out, "What's next for you? Are you returning to your firm?" Rachel smiled, and it was genuine despite everything. "No, I'm opening a new practice, the Bennett Defense Clinic. It will provide free legal representation to anyone who's been wrongfully detained, profiled, or had their rights violated by federal immigration enforcement." She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph, the rendering of a storefront, windows bright with promise, a sign that read, "Bennett Defense Clinic." Justice is a verb. This clinic will be funded by the settlement from my lawsuit against ICE. Every dollar that was meant to silence me will instead amplify the voices of people who've been told they don't matter. People who've been treated as less than human because of where they were born, or what they look like, or how they speak. Michael stepped closer, his hand finding hers, squeezing gently. Rachel glanced at him, drawing strength from his presence, then looked back at the cameras. "I was assaulted in front of my children's school. I was handcuffed, brutalized, and treated like a criminal, despite having done nothing wrong. And I had resources that most people don't have. I had a husband with power. I had legal knowledge. I had citizenship status that couldn't be questioned." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "But what about the people who don't have those things? What about the mothers who get stopped and can't call the general? What about the fathers who know the law but don't speak English fluently enough to assert their rights? What about the families who are too afraid to fight back because they're worried about deportation or retaliation?" Rachel looked directly into the nearest camera, and for a moment, it felt like she was speaking to every person who had ever been made to feel powerless, every person who had been told their dignity was negotiable. Those are the people the Bennett Defense Clinic will serve, because justice isn't something that just happens. It's not a noun. It's a verb. It's something we do, something we fight for, something we build case by case, family by family, until the system that failed us becomes the system that protects us. A reporter from the Washington Post raised her hand. "Do you have a message for other federal agents or for ICE as an institution?" Rachel's expression hardened, her attorney's mask sliding into place. "My message is simple. We're watching. Every stop, every detention, every use of force, we're watching. And if you violate someone's rights, if you let your biases dictate your actions, if you abuse the power you've been given, we will hold you accountable. Not just in the court of public opinion, but in actual courts with actual consequences." She held up a business card, the clinic's information printed in bold letters. "The Bennett Defense Clinic opens soon. If you've been wrongfully detained, if you've been profiled, if you've had your rights violated, call us. We will fight for you because what happened to me should never happen to anyone. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure it doesn't." The questions continued, but Rachel had said what she needed to say. Michael guided her through the crowd, his arm protective around her shoulders. As they reached their car, Rachel looked back one last time at the courthouse, at the reporters still filming, at the symbol of a system that had both failed her and ultimately delivered justice. Sophia and Jacob were waiting at home, probably doing homework at the kitchen table, probably asking their grandmother when Mom and Dad would be back. Rachel thought about them, about the conversation they would have tonight, about how she would explain that the man who hurt their mother was going to prison, about how something good was being born from something terrible. She slid into the passenger seat, Michael behind the wheel. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Rachel felt something shift inside her. Not closure. She wasn't sure she believed in closure, but purpose, direction, the knowledge that her pain would become someone else's protection. Justice wasn't just what happened in that courtroom today. In the end, Rachel Bennett's nightmare at the school drop-off line taught us one of the most powerful truths about life. Your dignity is never up for negotiation, even when the person trying to strip it away wears a badge. What began as a moment of raw terror and humiliation became something far greater, a fierce reminder that standing up for your rights, even when your voice shakes and your heart pounds, is never weakness. It's courage in its purest form. Rachel could have stayed silent, complied out of fear, and gone quietly into that system. But she chose to speak. She chose to assert who she was: a mother, a wife, a brilliant attorney, and above all, a human being who refused to be reduced to someone else's prejudice. Her strength didn't just free her that day. It exposed a deeper injustice and sparked real change. That's the lesson that stays with me. Real power doesn't always come from authority or force. Sometimes it rises quietly from within, from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. When the world tries to tell you that you don't belong, that you're less than, that your voice doesn't matter, remember Rachel. Stand tall. Speak clearly. Protect your peace and your people. Because the moment you stop fighting for your dignity is the moment you hand it over to someone who never deserved it in the first place. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground when every instinct told you to stay quiet? How did it change you? Share your story in the comments below. I truly read every single one, and your experiences matter here. If this story touched something deep inside you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that remind us of our strength, our rights, and the power we all carry when we refuse to be broken. Your voice belongs in this community. Let's keep lifting each other up.